You did it again. You can feel it happening even as it happens, like watching yourself from the outside, powerless to intervene. Someone got too close, not threatening close, not dangerous close, just close. Close enough that their warmth started to feel real. Their presence started to feel necessary. Their absence started to matter in a way that made your chest tighten. And something inside you, something old and automatic and far beyond the reach of logic, decided that this was too much, that this needed to stop, that you needed to get out. So you found a reason. Maybe you picked a fight over something so small you can barely name it now. Maybe you went cold, not dramatically, not with any announcement, just quietly, imperceptibly, withdrawing the warmth until they could feel the distance without being able to explain it. Maybe you found a flaw in them, something that had always been there but suddenly became unbearable. A reason to pull back that felt justified, that felt like discernment rather than fear. Maybe you simply disappeared, stopped texting back with the same frequency, became busy in ways that were technically true, but mostly convenient. Put enough space between you and them that the closeness could no longer reach you, and then they pulled away too, because people can only reach for so long before their arms get tired, and you were left with the thing you always end up with. The familiar, hollow, somehow almost comfortable weight of being alone again, and part of you was relieved, and part of you was devastated, and the part that was devastated looked at the part that was relieved and asked, "Why do you keep doing this? Why do you keep destroying the very things you want most? Why does closeness feel like something to survive rather than something to inhabit?" These are not rhetorical questions. They have real answers. And understanding those answers, truly understanding them, not just intellectually, but in the deep emotional place where the pattern actually lives, is where everything begins to change. Today we are going inside the psychology of people who push everyone away, not because they don't want love, but because some part of them has decided, beneath the level of conscious thought, that love is the most dangerous thing in the world, and that the only way to survive it is to make sure it never gets close enough to hurt you again. Let's begin with the pattern itself, because before we can understand where it comes from, we need to see it clearly, in its full complexity, in all the ways it disguises itself as something other than what it is. Pushing people away does not always look like conflict. It does not always look like anger or coldness or dramatic withdrawal. Sometimes it is so subtle that the person doing it is the last one to recognize it as a pattern at all. Sometimes it looks like perfectionism, holding people to standards so impossibly high that they cannot help but disappoint you, giving you a reason to create distance that feels earned rather than manufactured. Sometimes it looks like extreme self-sufficiency, insisting you need nothing from anyone, handling everything alone, never allowing anyone close enough to witness your vulnerability or your need. Sometimes it looks like constant criticism, finding fault with the people who love you, cataloging their flaws, focusing on what is wrong rather than what is right, as though building a case against them is preparation for the inevitable moment they leave. Sometimes it looks like testing, saying or doing things designed, unconsciously but deliberately, to push the other person to their limit, to find the point at which they will finally give up and go, because somewhere inside you believe that point exists, and you would rather find it on your terms than be surprised by it on theirs. Sometimes it looks like nothing at all, just a quiet, gradual cooling, a slow retraction of warmth and presence that the other person can feel but cannot name, cannot challenge, cannot address, because nothing specific has happened. You have simply begun the process of making yourself unavailable, of making the closeness impossible to sustain. And here is the part that makes this pattern so particularly painful. The people who push others away are not people who don't feel. They're often the people who feel most intensely. The longing for connection is real. The love, when it is present, is genuine and deep. The grief when someone finally goes, when the pushing finally works, is not the relief they expected, but a devastation they recognize, because they have felt it before. They have felt it many times before, and they caused it every single time, and they could not stop themselves, and they do not fully understand why. That gap between what you want and what you do, between the love you feel and the behavior it produces, is where the real psychology lives. And to understand it, we have to go back. we have to go back to where the pattern was written. Every adult who pushes people away was once a child who learned something about what closeness costs. Maybe they learned it dramatically. A parent who was present and then suddenly wasn't. A caregiver whose love came with unpredictable withdrawal. Warm today, cold tomorrow, present this week, gone the next. Teaching the child that attachment is a gamble and the odds are never in your favor. A person who loved them and then left. A loss so significant and so early that the child's developing nervous system made a decision it would spend decades enforcing. If you do not let anyone fully in, they cannot fully leave. Maybe they learned it quietly. A home where emotional intimacy was simply not modeled, where people lived alongside each other but did not truly meet each other, where love was expressed through provision rather than presence, through obligation rather than genuine desire. A childhood where the child learned to be self-sufficient, not because independence was encouraged, but because dependence was simply not met. They asked for things: comfort, attention, connection, and those things either did not come or came inconsistently enough that eventually the child stopped asking, stopped needing, or at least stopped showing the need. Built a self that required nothing from anyone. Wore that self so long it began to feel like who they were. Maybe they learned it painfully, in a home where closeness was followed by hurt, where the person they loved most was also the person most capable of wounding them, where intimacy meant exposure, and exposure meant vulnerability, and vulnerability meant pain, where being fully known by someone meant it being fully available to be hurt by them. And so the child developed a system: keep people at a distance, close enough to function, far enough to be safe, never fully in, never fully trusted, never allowed to reach the place where they can do the kind of damage that the people who were supposed to love you once did. These experiences do not disappear when childhood ends. They become the architecture of your attachment style. They become the unconscious rules your nervous system applies to every subsequent relationship. And in the language of attachment theory, the framework developed by John Bowlby and later expanded by researchers like Mary Main and Kim Bartholomew, the pattern we are describing most closely resembles what psychologists call fearful avoidant attachment. Fearful avoidant attachment is perhaps the most complex and most painful of the 4 primary attachment styles. Unlike securely attached individuals who can move toward closeness without panic, or dismissive avoidants who have genuinely suppressed their need for connection, or anxiously attached individuals who pursue closeness desperately despite their fear of abandonment, the fearfully avoidant person lives in a state of permanent internal conflict. They want intimacy deeply, and they fear it just as deeply. They are pulled toward connection and simultaneously terrified of it. And because they can find no resolution to this conflict, because they cannot make themselves want connection less and cannot make themselves fear it less, they oscillate. They move toward people and then away. They invite closeness and then sabotage it. They love and then leave. Or they stay and make staying so difficult that the other person eventually chooses to leave instead. The fearfully avoidant person does not push people away because they do not care. They push people away because caring is the most frightening thing they know how to do. Let's talk about what this looks like in practice, in the specific, lived texture of daily life and relationship. Because the theory is important, but it is the recognition that does the real work. The moment you see your own pattern described with enough precision that the recognition moves through you like something breaking open, you meet someone, and they are good, genuinely good, kind, present, interested in you in the way you have always wanted someone to be interested in you. And for a moment, maybe a few weeks, maybe a few months, you let yourself feel it. You let yourself like them. You let the warmth in. You have conversations that feel real. You share things you don't usually share. You begin, cautiously, tentatively, to let them see parts of you that you normally keep carefully hidden. And then something shifts. Not in them, in you. The closeness that felt exciting starts to feel suffocating. The vulnerability that felt brave starts to feel dangerous. The fact that they know things about you now, real things, true things, starts to feel less like intimacy and more like exposure. And the part of you that was built for survival starts whispering, "This is too much. This is how people get hurt. They know too much now. They are too close now. If they leave from here, from this level of closeness, it will be devastating. You need to get out while you still can. You need to create some distance before this gets any more dangerous." And so you do. Sometimes consciously, but usually not. You find something to be annoyed about. Something they did that bothered you, that you might have let go before but now feels important to examine, to name, to address in a way that creates friction. Or you become busy. Genuinely busy perhaps, but also conveniently busy, in a way that means less time together, less contact. A natural seeming pulling back that cannot be challenged directly because you have not technically done anything wrong. Or you go quiet in a way you cannot explain even to yourself. A flatness in your responses, a withdrawal of the particular aliveness you are bringing to the connection before. And they feel it, even if they cannot name it, and they start to wonder what they did, what changed, what they missed. And here is one of the most heartbreaking parts of this pattern. The other person almost always blames themselves. They go through everything they said, everything they did, trying to identify the moment things shifted. They wonder if they were too much or not enough. They try harder, more effort, more understanding, more patience, because they can feel you pulling away and they do not want to lose you. And they're trying, they're pursuing, they're reaching, which is completely natural and completely loving, actually accelerates your withdrawal. Because the more they pursue, the more trapped you feel. The more they demonstrate that they want you, the more urgently your nervous system tells you to run. And eventually they stop. Because people can only give for so long without receiving. Because self-preservation is as human as love. And when they stop, when they finally withdraw the effort, when they create the distance you seem to be asking for, you feel it immediately. The loss of them, the absence of their warmth and their reaching. And something in you wants to move toward them again, to undo the distance, to rebuild what you just spent weeks carefully dismantling. And sometimes you do. You come back, you soften, you reach, and because they care about you, because the connection was real for them too, they receive you, they let you back in, and the cycle begins again. This is not malicious. This is not manipulation in the conscious, deliberate sense. This is a nervous system doing what nervous systems do, reacting to perceived threat with established defense patterns, executing the survival strategy it learned before you were old enough to choose a different one. The tragedy is not that you are broken. The tragedy is that a system built to protect you from pain is now the primary source of it. There are specific symptoms that people who push others away experience that are worth naming clearly, because naming them is the first step toward recognizing them in real time, rather than only in retrospect. The first is what might be called the devaluation cycle. This is the psychological mechanism by which the fearfully avoidant person unconsciously begins to find fault with a partner or close friend precisely at the moment the connection deepens. Before the closeness intensified, the other person's qualities were seen clearly, their kindness, their humor, their care. But as intimacy increases and the nervous system's alarm bells begin to sound, something shifts in perception. Suddenly, the same qualities that were endearing become irritating. The same habits that were charming become intolerable. The same person who felt like exactly what you needed starts to feel like someone you are not sure you even like. This is not a genuine reassessment. This is the mind manufacturing distance. This is your psychology creating an exit strategy by rewriting the story of who this person is to you. The second symptom is the pursuit of the unavailable. People who push others away often notice a painful pattern in their attractions. They are drawn most powerfully to people who are emotionally unavailable, who are ambiguous in their affections, who are hot and cold in ways that keep the anxious part of the fearfully avoidant person engaged, while the avoidant part feels relatively safe. With someone fully available, fully present, fully willing to love you consistently, the closeness feels overwhelming, the stakes feel unbearably high, and the urge to push becomes almost irresistible. But with someone who keeps some distance naturally, who is not entirely available, the dynamic feels more manageable, more familiar, more like what love was trained to feel like in childhood. The third symptom is the inability to be fully known. People with this pattern often have deep, rich inner lives, genuine warmth, real depth, authentic feeling, that they share only in carefully rationed fragments. They might reveal something personal and then immediately regret it, pull it back, qualify it, minimize it, or change the subject. They are constantly self-editing in relationships, aware of how much they have shared, calibrating whether it was too much, monitoring whether the revelation has made them too vulnerable. They want to be known. They are terrified of being known. And so they live in the middle, sharing enough to feel connected, withholding enough to feel safe, and experiencing the result as a loneliness that follows them even into their closest relationships. The fourth symptom is the pattern of leaving before being left. This might be the most fundamental of all. Beneath all the specific behaviors, the picking of fights, the withdrawal, the devaluation, the self-sufficiency, there is one driving fear, the fear of abandonment. Not a conscious, articulated fear, but a cellular, nervous system level terror. The body's memory of what it felt like to need someone and have them not be there. And the strategy the nervous system developed in response to that terror was both logical and devastating in its long-term consequences. If I leave first, I cannot be left. If I create the distance, the ending is on my terms. If I push them away before they can walk away, I maintain the illusion of control over the thing I am most afraid of. And so, every relationship, every friendship, every moment of genuine connection carries within it the seed of its own destruction, planted there by the part of you that is still trying to protect the child who was once left in a way they never recovered from. Here's where something important needs to be said, something that often gets missed in conversations about attachment patterns and self-sabotage, possibly because it is uncomfortable to say. Pushing people away does real damage, not just to yourself, though the cost to yourself is enormous, but to the people you push. The person who tried to love you and found themselves suddenly on the outside without understanding why. The person who blamed themselves for a distance you manufactured. The person who stayed through the pushing and the testing and the cycles of withdrawal and return until they finally couldn't anymore. Not because they didn't care, but because caring for someone who will not let themselves be cared for eventually depletes even the most devoted person. Acknowledging this is not about shame. Shame will not help you change this pattern. In fact, shame is likely to accelerate it, because shame increases the feeling that you are fundamentally flawed and unworthy of love, which is one of the core beliefs driving the pushing in the first place. But accountability is different from shame. Accountability says, I can see the impact of my behavior on the people around me, and I care about that impact, and I want to do something different. Not because I am bad, but because I am capable of something better, and I know it. The people who push others away are almost always people with enormous capacity for love. The pushing is not evidence of coldness or indifference. It is evidence of how much is at stake. You do not build walls around things you do not care about. You build walls around things you cannot afford to lose. And the people who push hardest are often the people who feel most deeply, who know, on some cellular level, that if they let someone all the way in and then lose them, it will break something that has already been broken before and barely survived the first time. That is not a small thing. That is not weakness. That is the history of a human being trying to survive their own vulnerability. And it deserves to be met by yourself and by the right people, with compassion rather than judgment. So, what does change actually look like? Not the performance of change, not white-knuckling your way through the urge to withdraw and calling that healing, but the real, neurological, experiential shift that happens when the pattern begins to genuinely loosen its grip. It begins with recognition, not the intellectual recognition of knowing the pattern exists. Many people who push others away know the pattern exists. They have read about attachment theory. They have identified their style. They can describe the cycle in clinical detail, and they still cannot stop it. Recognition in the healing sense is something different. It is the moment you catch the behavior in real time, not 3 days later in retrospect, but in the actual moment it is happening, and name it for what it is. I am about to create distance right now, not because this person did something wrong, not because this relationship is genuinely failing, but because it is getting close enough that my nervous system is sounding the alarm. And the alarm is not truth. It is history. It is the echo of a wound, not the reality of this moment. That recognition, practiced consistently, begins to create a gap, a small but crucial gap between the trigger and the response, between the feeling of closeness becoming overwhelming and the automatic reaching for the exit. And in that gap, in that small growing space, choice begins to exist where before there was only reflex. The second element of change is learning to tolerate the discomfort of closeness rather than immediately resolving it through distance. This is not comfortable. It is genuinely one of the harder things a human nervous system can be asked to do, to stay in the presence of the thing it has been trained to flee from, to allow the feeling of intimacy and vulnerability to exist in the body without immediately acting to dissolve it. There will be moments when it feels almost physically unbearable, when the urge to create distance is so strong it feels like a physical pressure, when every instinct says leave and staying requires a conscious, deliberate, effortful choice. But here is what happens when you make that choice, when you stay instead of running, when you allow someone to be close without immediately finding a reason to push them back. The nervous system, which predicted catastrophe, does not encounter catastrophe. It encounters safety, or something close enough to safety that the message begins, very slowly, to update. This is tolerable. This did not destroy me. This person stayed, even when they saw this part of me. And that experience, repeated, accumulated, built up over time through hundreds of small moments of choosing to stay, is what actually rewires the attachment system. Not insight, not understanding. Experience, the lived experience of closeness without catastrophe. The third element is finding and working with a therapist who specializes in attachment. This is not a suggestion made lightly or as a generic disclaimer. It is made because the pattern we are describing, fearful, avoidant attachment rooted in early relational trauma, is one of the most deeply embedded psychological patterns a person can carry, and trying to dismantle it alone, through willpower and self-awareness alone, is like trying to perform surgery on yourself. You need someone who can be a safe relational figure while you practice staying, who can model the very thing you are trying to learn, consistent, boundaried, non-punishing presence, who can help you access and process the early experiences that wrote the original rules. Modalities like EMDR, internal family systems therapy, and somatic therapy have all shown significant effectiveness with exactly this kind of relational wound, and finding a practitioner who works with attachment trauma specifically is one of the most powerful investments you can make in your own healing. The fourth element is honesty with the people in your life, not a full disclosure of your psychological history in the early stages of a relationship. That would itself be a form of testing, of emotional flooding, of making the other person responsible for something they have not yet earned the right to carry. But the willingness, with people who have demonstrated they are safe, to say, I notice I am pulling away and I don't fully understand why, but I wanted to name it rather than just let it happen. To say, I do this thing sometimes, where I create distance when I get scared, and I'm working on it, and I want you to know it is not about you. That level of honesty, vulnerable, accountable, not perfectly executed, but genuinely offered, is itself a form of staying. It is the choice to let someone see the mechanism instead of just experiencing its effects. And it changes things. Not always. Not for everyone. But for the right people, for the people who are themselves safe enough to receive it, it creates the possibility of a different kind of relationship. One where the pattern can be named and worked with together rather than acted out in silence and confusion. You are not someone who doesn't want love. Let that land for a moment, because it may be the most important thing in this entire video. You're not someone who doesn't want love. You're someone who wants it so much and fears losing it so deeply that you developed an entire psychological system designed to make sure you never have to feel that loss again. A system so sophisticated and so automatic that it can dismantle a relationship before you have consciously decided to end it. A system so powerful that it has been operating, largely unchallenged, for most of your adult life. But systems can change. Nervous systems can rewire. Patterns built in relationship can be healed in relationship. The same attachment system that learned to fear closeness can learn through enough consistent, safe experience to tolerate it, to welcome it, to stop treating love as a threat and start experiencing it as what it actually is, the thing you have been wanting and protecting yourself from and grieving the absence of for as long as you can remember. The walls you built were not a mistake. They were the best solution a child could find to a problem that was too large for them to solve any other way. And they served you. They protected you. They kept something intact in you that might otherwise have been lost entirely. But you are not that child anymore. And the walls that once kept you safe are now keeping you lonely. And you have something now that you did not have then. You have understanding. You have language for the thing. You have the ability to choose, in small moments, in the gap between trigger and response, to do something different. You have the capacity to stay, not perfectly, not without fear, not without the old impulse rising up and whispering its familiar warnings, but enough. Enough to let someone see you, enough to let someone stay, enough to find out, perhaps for the first time, what it actually feels like to be loved by someone who knows the real you. Not the performed self, not the carefully rationed self, but the full, complicated, walls and all, trying and failing and trying again, self. That self deserves to be loved. That self has always deserved to be loved. And the pushing, all the pushing, was never proof that it didn't. It was only ever proof of how much it hurt the last time someone let you believe it could be. You are allowed to believe it again, carefully, slowly, with help and with patience, and with the understanding that healing is not linear and setbacks are not failures, but you are allowed to begin.